The coffee sat cold on the table. It was like an uninvited guest, silently placing its suitcase right in the middle of my living room, without so much as a greeting. This morning felt different. I sat there, spoon suspended above my bowl of oatmeal, trying not to look at James. He sat across from me, newspaper in hand, but his eyes didn't move, as if the words were just a cover for the silence. The kitchen felt like it always did. A faint scent of toast hung in the air. The gentle hum of the refrigerator was the only sound between us. James folded the paper with slow, deliberate movements. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "Susan," he said, his voice flat, like he was reading an announcement from a teleprompter. "Let's get a divorce." The spoon in my hand froze. A drop of oatmeal slid off and fell back into the bowl with a soft plop. I stared down at it, at the dull gray circles floating on the surface of the milk. Out there, people still thought we were the model couple. James Davis, a successful businessman in his early 40s. No gambling, no scandals, no reckless spending on flashy pleasures. The wives in the neighborhood always praised him, holding him up as the standard for their own husbands. "Your James is a rare find," they'd say with a jealous wink. I always nodded and smiled, because I believed it. 2. James was a devoted husband, a thoughtful father, the result of years I had carefully nurtured. I remembered the early days when love still burned like a flame. The handwritten letters he sent me in college, the long nights we spent on park benches, his warm hand wrapped round mine as we dreamed about the future. Time had dulled that fire, but I didn't mind. It had settled into something warmer, steadier, a soft kiss on my forehead each morning before he left for work, never missing a single parent-teacher meeting for our daughter, Daisy. Despite his packed calendar, he never brought his office frustrations home, never raised his voice at me or her. I thought, this is the man I will grow old with. But last night, he came home from a reunion with his old friends, and his footsteps were heavier than usual. He didn't share stories about his classmates, didn't ask how my day went. He just quietly took off his coat, hung it on the rack, and went straight to bed. This morning, he sat through breakfast without a word, holding the newspaper and staring into space. I thought maybe it was just a bad day, a passing mood. Then he said those words. I didn't understand. Wasn't everything still fine? Just a few days ago, we were sitting on the sofa, talking about where to travel for our anniversary. James had hugged me from behind, his voice warm as he whispered into my ear, "Babe, it's been so long since we had time just for ourselves." He suggested asking his parents to come take care of Daisy for a few days, so we could have our own private getaway. I leaned my head against his chest, felt his steady heartbeat, and thought we had weathered so many storms. I believed only a smooth road lay ahead. We were past 40, no longer burning with the fiery passion of our youth, but the love was still there, solid like the foundation of this house. It was just a reunion with old friends. I couldn't make sense of it. What could have possibly made James decide something so absurd? I put the spoon down on the table. The metal hit the wood with a dry clank that echoed in the quiet room. I stared at him, my body frozen, my eyes widened, my chest heaving as I struggled to breathe. "Are you joking?" I asked, my voice trembling, hoping it was just some stupid, cruel prank. James finally looked up from the folded newspaper. His eyes were serious, unmoving like stone. "Susan, I'm not joking," he said, his voice low and steady. A wave of dizziness crashed over me. The world blurred, and only the loud thudding of my own heartbeat echoed in my ears. I tried to stay calm, swallowed hard, and forced myself to ask the next question. "Okay, tell me why." My hand gripped the edge of the table, my fingernails digging into the wood, trying to stop my body from shaking. James sat there, leaning forward, his hands clasped together as if he were begging for forgiveness. He began to speak, his voice hesitant at first, but when he said the name Diana, the corners of his mouth curved ever so slightly into a fleeting smile. His tone became unusually soft, like he was caressing a fragile memory. He told me about the reunion last night, about how he had met her again, his high school sweetheart. Every word he spoke felt like a blade twisting in my chest. Yet, he kept talking. His eyes lit with a passion I hadn't seen in years. When he finished, a storm surged inside me, wild and uncontrollable like the sea. I wanted to appear calm, to keep my dignity, but my eyes were already wet. Tears began streaming down my cheeks. My mouth opened, but my voice was choked with emotion. So, you met your first love again? She's divorced. Her life's a mess. And now you want to marry her? My voice broke on the last word. I covered my mouth with my hand to muffle the sobs, but the tears kept falling, soaking the collar of my shirt. You wouldn't understand, Susan, James rushed to say, his voice urgent. His hand reached out across the table, but he quickly pulled it back. She's nothing like you, he continued, his words painting a picture of a woman broken by life. She was pampered like a princess her whole life, never went through any real hardship. After she got married, her husband's family was well off, but he gambled everything away. He lost everything and left her with a mountain of debt. Then, her father died in an accident right after the divorce. She has no one left. She's never worked a real job a day in her life. She doesn't know how to survive. He paused, his eyes distant, as if he was seeing it all again. You don't know, he continued, his voice thick with pity. When I saw her yesterday, her heels were peeling. The leather was worn and cracked. My heart just broke. In the past, one pair of her shoes could have fed me for months. He gave a sad smile, his fingers brushing the edge of the table as if touching a memory. That girl, so beautiful and talented, she chose someone like me who had nothing. We dated from high school all through college. We went to different schools but in the same city. She would take the bus to come see me, eat with me at cheap street stalls, even worked side jobs with me just to spend time together. I looked at the man confessing before me, his face flushed, his eyes glossy like he was about to cry. If you loved her so much, I asked, my voice cold to hide the excruciating pain, then why did you break up? James gave a bitter laugh, his shoulders slumping as if he was carrying a heavy burden. I couldn't bear it, he said, his voice barely a whisper. She never cared that I was poor, but I hated myself for it. I had just graduated, was renting a basement room for $500 a month with no future in sight. I couldn't give her the life she deserved, and I couldn't stand to watch her suffer with me. I wasn't worthy of her. What else could I do but let her go? I took a deep breath, trying to compose myself, but my chest felt like it was being pricked with 1,000 tiny needles. And now, I said, my voice shaking uncontrollably, now you think you can give her the life she wants. You want to hand her the best of everything. But what about me? What about Daisy? Tears poured down my face, soaking my sleeves and dripping loudly onto the wooden table. I rarely cried, but now, everything broke loose inside me. Seeing me cry, James panicked. He jumped up from his chair, grabbed a box of tissues from the counter, and pulled out napkins with trembling hands to hand them to me. Susan, I'm so sorry. I'll leave everything to you and Daisy. The house, the cars, the savings. I don't want anything. You two can still live the same life as before. So, I cut him off, a bitter, twisted smile forming on my lips. You're set on divorcing me, aren't you? It's decided. James lowered his head, clenching the napkin in his fist until his knuckles turned white. Diana's too fragile, he whispered, his voice thick with guilt. She doesn't have a steady job. I'm afraid if this continues, she won't survive. She doesn't have a job? I shouted, my voice echoing through the kitchen. My hand slammed the table, making the coffee cup rattle in its saucer. Then help her find one. Why do you have to marry her? James shook his head, his eyes red as he tried to explain. I can't. She doesn't want to accept help from me. He paused, inhaling deeply as if he were fighting something inside himself. But if she marries you, I screamed, my voice shrill with fury, tears still streaming down my face. Then she's okay with taking your help. Does she not know you're married? Does she not know that destroying someone else's family makes her trash? Diana Chase. How does she not feel ashamed? I had never felt such raw, violent emotion. My chest heaved. I felt like I was suffocating. Enough. James snapped, springing to his feet. His face was red. His finger pointed at me for a second before it dropped to his side. Diana didn't do anything wrong. I'm the one who wants to marry her. She refused, but I insisted. I can't just stand by and watch her live like that. He stopped, his voice breaking. He turned away to hide the tears welling in his eyes. You couldn't bear it. I interrupted, my voice dripping with sarcasm. I stood up to face him, wiping my own tears away roughly with the back of my hand. Well, I won't divorce you. This is my marriage. This is the family I fought to keep, and I won't let someone else just steal it away. James looked at me, his eyes filled with an unbearable exhaustion. He reached for his coat on the back of the chair, moving slowly, like an old man. Think it over. Susan, call me when you've calmed down, he said, his voice tired. He turned his back on me and headed toward the door. I'll be staying at the office for the next few days. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving me alone in the deafening silence of our perfect home. The image of James as a good man collapsed inside me like a crumbling wall. In the days that followed, he took care of everything for Diana Chase and her daughter. He moved them into a luxury apartment under his name, in a sparkling new building with windows facing the river. He enrolled Diana's daughter Lily in a prestigious private school, the same one Daisy attended, as if he wanted to dig the knife deeper into the wound. He even arranged for Diana to be his personal secretary, a title that made her a constant fixture by his side, tagging along to meetings, work dinners, and client events. When someone at a dinner party made a teasing comment about Diana, I heard he jumped up, his face flushed, his voice sharp in her defense. That's enough, I could imagine him saying, his hand clenched around the stem of a wine glass, his eyes lit with a protective fire that was once reserved for me. The whispers followed me everywhere. James found his true love in midlife. I first heard that exact line at the spa, amidst the cloying scent of lavender oils and the soft chime of ambient music. The familiar wives circled me, their mouths dripping with sympathy, but their eyes glinting with a smug satisfaction. Susan, you have to be strong, one of them said, lightly patting my shoulder. Her red nails were garish and pointed, like tiny daggers. Men, you know, they always have a soft spot for their old flames. They shared tips on keeping a husband, on securing assets, on how to deal with the other woman. I nodded, my lips pressed into a tight, thin line. But in my head, I was shocked to realize I was actually listening, actually considering their words. The one who used to tell them that if a man cheats, his soul is already dirty, and taking him back would only feel disgusting. And now, here I was, becoming the very woman I once despised. I left the spa, the bright afternoon sunlight blinding me. I had to squint as I walked to my car. My hand clutched my handbag so tightly my knuckles were white, my nails digging into the soft leather. I used to be so confident, so dismissive of their marital problems. Go get a job, I used to say to them, my voice full of a confidence I no longer felt. Once you're busy, you won't have time for this nonsense. But now, living it myself, I realized how hard it was to just let go. This was the family I had poured my heart and soul into. This was the man I had shaped, day by day, step by step, from an ambitious young graduate into the successful figure he was now. I couldn't just walk away and hand it all over. James was soft-hearted. I knew that better than anyone. If I lowered myself, acted pitiful, cried and begged, and leaned on the years of our bond, maybe he wouldn't have the heart to leave me. But I didn't want to. Why should I have to beg the man who betrayed me? I wasn't the one at fault. So, we were locked in a stalemate. The more I stood firm and refused to divorce, the more justified James felt in leaving. His guilt began to fade. I saw it in the way he snuck back home while I was at work, quietly gathering his remaining clothes and belongings, leaving empty drawers behind like open wounds. He moved in with Diana, parading her around in public, stripping me of every last shred of my dignity. I tried to stay calm, but my pride was afire, burning away at my composure. I refused to sign the divorce papers. I wouldn't let them legitimize their affair. I wanted Diana to forever carry the title of mistress, a thorn in everyone's eyes. But then Daisy's parent-teacher conference came up. I was stuck with a major client at the studio and couldn't get away. I called James, hoping he'd attend for me. On the other end of the line, his new assistant answered, his voice polite but cold. A few moments later, James came on the line. "Susan," he said, his tone devoid of any warmth. "Unless it's about the divorce, I have nothing to say to you." I hung up, my hand trembling, my chest so tight it felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. I drove to his company's headquarters, my heels clicking loudly on the polished marble floor of the lobby. The receptionist smiled sweetly. "I'm sorry, you don't have an appointment. You can't see Mr. Davis." I asked her to schedule one for me immediately, but she just kept smiling, repeating like a robot, "He's not available today. Perhaps you can try another day. Everyone needs an appointment. I'm his wife," I said, my voice sharp, my hand clenching the strap of my bag. Her smile never wavered. "I understand, ma'am, but everyone needs an appointment." I turned away, feeling like I'd just been slapped across the face. I drove to their apartment, the new home of James and Diana. Standing at the door, I typed in our old security code, the one we'd used for everything or anniversary date, one digit at a time. The system beeped with an error, a dry, cold sound that felt like a laugh. I stood there staring at the glossy wooden door, my arms limp at my sides. On the way home, I pulled the car over, leaned my head against the steering wheel, and let out a bitter laugh, my breath turning into white mist in the cold air. James used to be the first to pick up my calls. He once told me that during important meetings, he blocked all incoming calls except mine. On weekends, when we went on trips, anyone who wanted to reach him had to go through my number. And now, a woman at the spa had joked just last week, "If you want to reach James these days, you just have to call Secretary Diana." That line cut into my heart like a shard of glass. That night, Daisy sat at the dinner table, her wide eyes staring down at her plate. The housekeeper placed a hot bowl of soup in front of me, but I couldn't bring myself to touch it. Suddenly, Daisy looked up, her eyes glassy. "Mom," she asked quietly, "Dad's not really on a business trip, is he?" I opened my mouth, about to make up another lie, but she continued, her voice shaking. "Today I saw Dad." Her words hung in the air. "He dropped off a girl at school this morning, and he picked her up in the evening. He was with a lady, and he held her waist." "Mom," her voice cracked, and a tear rolled down her cheek. "Does Dad not want us anymore? Does he want to be that girl's dad now?" Tears streamed down her face, her little shoulders trembling. I quickly moved to her side and pulled her into my arms, trying to smile. "Of course not, sweetheart. Dad's just helping a friend take care of their child for a bit. He'll come back soon." But inside, I was shattering into a million pieces. I held my child close, felt her small body shaking with sobs, and asked myself what on earth I was still fighting for. At midnight, Daisy had a high fever. I carried her into the car and told the driver to head straight for the hospital. In the back seat, she was delirious, but she kept mumbling for her father. "Mom, Dad will come, right?" Daisy gripped my hand weakly, her skin burning hot. "He always stayed with me all night when I was sick. My fever is so high. He'll come visit me, won't he?" I held her tighter, my heart aching with a pain so sharp it took my breath away. "Daisy," I whispered, a terrible suspicion dawning on me. Did you make yourself sick on purpose?" She nodded, her voice tiny. "I used the shower to get my hair wet, and I didn't dry it. I knew I'd get a fever. I just wanted to see Dad. I hugged Daisy, tears I didn't know I had left falling like rain. You silly, silly girl, I whispered, rocking her gently. Why would you do that to yourself? I called James. The phone rang endlessly, but no one picked up. After the four-drip, morning had come. Daisy lay in the sterile hospital bed, her forehead still hot to the touch. I called her school to report her absence, my hands still trembling as I typed the message. When Daisy woke up, I bought her some warm cereal and helped her to the car. As we walked through the hospital hallway, she suddenly stopped, her eyes frozen on a scene ahead. I followed her gaze and saw them. James, Diana, and a girl around Daisy's age. Sweetheart, didn't you say your stomach hurts? Diana's voice was gentle as she stroked the girl's hair. Be good and go see the doctor. Okay. I looked at Diana for the first time up close. A wave of disappointment filled me. She was thin, with a pale face, and looked clearly exhausted. She wasn't exceptionally pretty, not striking, nothing more than me. But James stood there, shielding the girl, smiling at Diana. Come on. Kids are like that. If she doesn't want to do P.E. today, she doesn't have to. He bent down and spoke to the girl. I'll talk to your teacher. I'll tell her you're not strong enough for long-distance running. The girl's eyes lit up. Really? Daddy James? Diana nudged him, scolding playfully. You always spoil her. I looked down at my own daughter. Daisy was sobbing silently, tears streaming down her face. I pulled her into my arms and let her cry, right there in the middle of the hallway, until she wore herself out. When she finally looked up, she wiped her tears with the back of her hand and said with a firmness that startled me, Mom, I don't need Dad anymore. I looked into her clear, determined eyes and saw a clarity that I, in all my pride and pain, did not have. Okay, I said, my own voice surprisingly steady. I had held on for too long. For what? To save a family that was already gone? To salvage a warmth that no longer existed? James had cheated. That was a crack that could never be mended. Even if I dragged him back, his heart would belong elsewhere. He would resent me, and we would both be miserable. What good was keeping a family like that? I wanted Daisy to grow up happy, but in a broken home filled with anger and resentment. How could that ever happen? Standing in that cold, antiseptic hallway, I suddenly saw a way out of the dead end. Divorce wasn't failure. It was release. I had a job. I had money. And I had my daughter. Even in midlife, I still looked good. I could still live a happy, fulfilling life. I picked up my phone and called James's office. His assistant answered, his voice still politely distant. I spoke loud and clear, my voice unwavering. Please tell Mr. Davis that I agree to the divorce. I hung up before he could respond, stood tall, and looked out at the clear blue sky through the car window. For the first time in months, I felt like I could finally breathe again. The divorce process went smoothly, almost unnervingly so. I sat in the lawyer's office, the cold fluorescent light casting a sterile glare on the polished mahogany table, where the documents were neatly ranged. James sat across from me, his shoulders slightly hunched, his eyes fixed on the stack of papers, never once daring to look up at me. Every time he signed his name, his hand trembled slightly, the pen scraping against the paper with a dry, scratching sound. Shame was written all over his face. I kept my voice calm and even. There was no blame, no shouting, just a quiet efficiency as I signed each document. My composed demeanor must have startled him into a final act of generosity. All the properties, the cash in our joint accounts, and even 10% of his company shares went to me. For Daisy, he mumbled, his voice low, still staring at the tabletop as if it held the answers to everything. I nodded without saying a word, but deep down, I knew the company was his backbone. With his skill set, his established client base, and his knowledge of the market, he would rebuild his fortune quickly. That was why he could let go of the assets so easily. It was a calculated move, a way to assuage his guilt without truly sacrificing his future. 1 month later, we returned to court to officially end our marriage. Daisy came with me, her small hand gripping mine tightly, her palm ice cold. She didn't look at her father, not even once. Her eyes were locked on the floor, her lips pressed together in a thin line, as if she were holding back 1,000 words. Outside the courthouse, the harsh midday sunlight made me squint. James stepped forward, a forced, awkward smile on his face. "Let me drive you both home," he said, trying to sound gentle and paternal. "Daisy, even though your mom and I are divorced, I'll still love you just the same." Daisy didn't reply. She just gripped my hand tighter. Right at that moment, Diana appeared, holding Lily's hand. The little girl chirped, her voice ringing out in the quiet courtyard, light and carefree. "Daddy, let's go to the amusement park. You promised." Daisy tugged at my sleeve, her voice firm and clear. "Mom, let's go home." I didn't look back. We walked away, Daisy's footsteps quickening on the pavement, as if she couldn't get away from that scene fast enough. A few weeks later, James's mother came to visit. Her frail hands clutched her purse, her eyes red and swollen. She sat on my sofa, beating her chest with a soft, rhythmic thud, her voice trembling. "Susan, I don't accept that girl. In my heart, you are my only daughter-in-law." I poured her a cup of tea and placed it on the coffee table in front of her. But I said nothing. I knew she meant it, but I also knew it changed nothing. Words were just air. Not long after, I heard from mutual friends. James and Diana had registered their marriage. At first, James's mother put up a furious fight. She stayed in the city for weeks, declaring that she would personally kick Diana out of the house. But I heard that Diana fainted 3 times in front of her, looking so frail and helpless that James finally snapped at his mother, his voice raised in anger for the first time in his life. Eventually, he quietly sent his mother back to their old town. In a family, the one who makes the money holds the power. Diana, though she appeared fragile, was clearly no simple woman. She had James completely wrapped around her finger. After the divorce, James and I barely communicated. Occasionally, I'd hear scraps of news about him from mutual friends, bits and pieces that I realized, to my own surprise, I no longer cared about. On James's 40th birthday, my phone buzzed while I was wiping down the kitchen table. His name lit up the screen for the first time since the divorce papers were signed. I picked up. His voice came through the line, slightly slurred with alcohol. "Susan, tomorrow's my birthday. Diana's throwing a small party at the house. You and Daisy should come." I stood still, the damp rag in my hand, the clean scent of lemon rising from the counter. "I don't have time," I replied coldly. He hesitated, then said, "Well, if you're busy, I'll have the driver pick up Daisy." I cut him off immediately. "No, I don't want her going alone. I'm afraid she'll be bullied." James was taken aback, his voice raising in disbelief. "What are you saying? Daisy is my daughter, my only child. Who would dare bully her in my home?" I let out a bitter, humorless laugh, my voice dripping with mock sweetness. "Are you sure she's your only daughter? You don't have another one living in that house." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, filled only with the sound of his heavy, drunken breathing. I hung up. That night, I told Daisy about the invitation and asked if she wanted to go. She shook her head immediately, her eyes firm, without a hint of doubt. "I'm not going, Mom," she said, her voice soft but certain, and then she turned back to the book she was reading. I nodded, a small weight lifting from my chest. The next night, past midnight, my phone buzzed again. It was James, completely drunk this time, his words slurring together. "Susan, it's been so many years, and this is the first time I haven't spent my birthday with you. I feel so empty." His voice was thick with self-pity. There were so many people here today. Family, friends, business partners. It was so lively, but I felt so alone. Before, every birthday, It was just the three of us. It wasn't crowded, but I was happy. I was content. He paused, his voice shaky. I didn't get to eat your pineapple cake, and I didn't get Daisy's gift. I'm really sad. Susan. I stood by the window, looking out at the hazy glow of the streetlights, my hand tightening around the phone. This was a familiar pattern for James. This drunken, rambling sentimentality. I cut him off. You're drunk. Go to sleep. Before he could say another word, I ended the call. The phone rang again immediately, but I powered it off and tossed it onto the table. Lying in bed, I closed my eyes, and the image of that pineapple cake came to mind. I hated pineapple. Daisy hated it, too, but James loved it. Every year on his birthday, I would put on a mask to block the overwhelming scent and carefully bake it for him. He would eat the whole thing, grinning from ear to ear, his arms wrapped around Daisy and me. Now, my house had no more pineapple, no more of that scent I hated so much. I smiled in the darkness, a feeling of lightness filling my chest. It felt wonderful. After the divorce, I felt a sense of relief I hadn't expected, like I had finally taken off a heavy backpack I'd been carrying for years. Life became simpler, with fewer tasks and obligations. Before, I was like a machine that never stopped running. Besides managing my design studio, I handled everything else. Daisy's homework, her weekend tutoring schedule, her health checkups, and her ever-changing moods. I tracked our real estate portfolio, stressed over utility bills, and handled small household repairs. Even though we had a housekeeper for cleaning and cooking, I still ironed the clothes myself, organized the wardrobes seasonally, and handled all the small, personal things for James. On top of that, even though my in-laws didn't live with us, I still had to manage the constant check-ins, the birthday gifts, the Thanksgiving baskets. Everything had to be thoughtful and well-prepared. If either of them needed anything, they never called James. They always called me, because in their eyes, he was the big boss, too busy with million-dollar contracts to be bothered with family matters. Relatives on both sides, his uncles, my siblings, anytime they came to the city, they called me for hotel bookings, restaurant recommendations, even flight tickets. I smiled, nodded, and logged it all into my phone. Whose birthday was it? Which store was having its grand opening? Which cousin was going into surgery? My schedule was jam-packed, a notebook filled with endless, unnamed responsibilities. James had a long list of clients to maintain, and I ended up becoming friends with their wives. I went to spas, went shopping, gave gifts, and smiled through endless tea parties, even when all I wanted to do was lie on the couch and read a book. I remember that last time at the spa, one of the wives flaunted a new handbag, glanced at me, and asked, "Susan, is James still spoiling you?" I gave a forced smile, my fingers tightening around my glass of orange juice, knowing full well they only envied the polished image of my perfect family. But now, I no longer had to play that role. I sold off all the properties we didn't need, keeping only the house near Daisy's school, a condo in the city center for convenience, and a quiet suburban home for weekend getaways. With less to manage, I finally felt free. I don't like worrying. If I could be lazy, I would choose lazy every time. For years, I had forced myself to be the perfect woman, handling everything, big and small, with a smile on my face. Now, I only took care of Daisy, my own parents, and myself. The messy relationships, the extended relatives, James's friends, all those drama-filled wives, you've cut them all out. My phone no longer buzzes with birthday reminders or scheduled social appointments. Every morning, I open my calendar app, see the beautiful, empty space, and I smile. Without the weight of those expectations, I had more energy for the things that truly mattered. The design studio I had started with my college friend, Megan, was growing. Our client list was steady, profits were climbing, and I found a renewed joy in my work, losing myself for hours in sketches and blueprints. I rediscovered my passion for new designs, for the creative process that I once had no time to truly love. This morning, I sat in my small, bright office, sunlight streaming through the large glass windows, illuminating the colorful architectural drawings spread across my desk. My assistant walked in, holding a folder, her expression hesitant. "Ms. Miller," she said softly, using my maiden name, which I had reclaimed with a quiet sense of triumph. "This is a big contract. The profit margin is excellent. Do you want to take it on?" I glanced at the proposal she handed me, and the company name jumped off the page, Davis Holdings. James's company. My heart paused, but only for a beat. I pushed the folder back toward her, my voice calm and steady. "No, turn it down." Megan, who had walked in behind her, raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" "Susan, that's a huge project." I met her gaze and smiled faintly. "I'm sure." They both nodded, asking no further questions. They trusted my judgment. I stepped out of the office later that evening. The dim hallway lights cast a soft glow on the polished wooden floors. The clock on the wall showed it was just past 6. The streets outside were beginning to light up, and the distant sound of traffic horns echoed faintly in the air. As I walked through the lobby, I saw him. James was waiting there, standing awkwardly near the glass doors. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine, and he gave a forced, uncertain smile. "Susan," he said, his voice soft, a slight hesitation in his tone, as if he were afraid I would turn and walk away. "Want to grab a bite to eat?" I stood still, my hand gripping the strap of my bag. "That's not necessary," I replied evenly, my eyes fixed on him, unwavering. James scratched the back of his head and stepped closer. "I just wanted to ask about that contract," he said, trying to sound casual, though the nervousness was plain on his face. "Why didn't you take it?" I raised an eyebrow and took a deep breath. "Work-related matters should be discussed in the office," I said, turning around and motioning for him to follow me back to the elevator. Inside my office, I turned on the lights. The cool, white glow illuminated the desk cluttered with drawings and documents. I sat down in my chair and pointed to the one across from me. James sat, his hands resting on his lap, his thumb rubbing anxiously against his knuckles, a habit he always had when he was nervous. "Susan, I didn't mean anything else by it," he began, his words quick, like he wanted to explain everything before I could cut him off. "That project always needs a top-tier design firm. I thought it would be better to give it to you than to some stranger. I trust your professionalism. Giving it to you gives me peace of mind. I save time vetting new partners, and your company makes a good profit, too. It's a win-win, isn't it?" He leaned forward, his eyes lighting up with the familiar glint of a salesman trying to close a major deal. I tapped my finger lightly on the table, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "The profit on that project is significant, isn't it?" I said calmly. "But I don't want to take it. I don't want to have too much contact with you. You're remarried. We used to be married. It's complicated, and I don't want your new wife to misunderstand and cause problems for me." I looked him straight in the eyes and saw something flicker there, a flash of frustration, like I had just caught a thought he didn't want to admit. James gave a strained laugh, running a hand through his hair. Under the bright office lights, I noticed for the first time the sprinkling of gray strands at his temples. No, he said, his voice a little too high, a little too eager, as if he were trying to reassure himself more than me. "Diana's not working anymore. She doesn't hold any position in the company, and she has no way of interfering with business. This would just be a public collaboration. No personal benefit involved. Even if she knew, there's no reason she would object." He paused, looking at me, waiting for some sign of agreement, but I just smiled faintly and tilted my head. "Really?" I asked, a trace of sarcasm coloring my voice. "Because I heard your dear wife recently ruined one of your most important deals." James's face darkened instantly, his lips pressed into a tight, hard line, as if I had just poked at a wound that hadn't healed. He looked down, his hands clenching into fists in his lap, his knuckles turning white. I stood up and walked toward the window, looking out at the glittering stream of car headlights below. The profit is tempting, James, but I'm afraid of the trouble, I said, my voice soft but firm, to avoid being dragged into unnecessary drama. I would rather not make that money. I turned back to face him and made a small gesture toward the door. A clear dismissal. Sorry, you should find another partner. As he stood to leave, I noticed something. In the past, whenever he had talked about Diana, his voice would turn tender. The corners of his mouth would lift unconsciously, as if he were describing a beautiful, fragile dream. But now, his tone was flat, and that special light in his eyes was gone. They hadn't even been married for that long. Yet the magic of his first love seemed to have already faded. I remembered those last, agonizing days of our marriage, how he spoke of Diana with such adoration, as if she were a precious gem that needed his constant protection. And now, all the flaws he once ignored in his idealized memory were probably surfacing, clearer and harsher with each passing day. First loves, it turns out, are only beautiful when they are kept in the heart as a distant memory, not when you have to live with them day in and day out. Over the years, I had moved through the elite circles of our city, chatting with wealthy housewives, shaking hands with powerful business partners. Gradually, I had sharpened my instincts about people. After James left my office, I sat there for a long time, the afternoon sunlight filtering through the blinds, casting a warm glow on a hand-drawn picture taped to the wall, a gift from Daisy, its childish lines filled with love. I thought about Diana, a woman I'd only met a few times, but enough to read her clearly. To be honest, she seemed happy, but it was the kind of fragile happiness that depends entirely on others, like a delicate orchid that can only bloom inside a climate-controlled glasshouse. Diana grew up pampered by her parents, a princess in a castle. After getting married, her first husband's family was wealthy, and she comfortably played the role of a sweet, decorative wife, never needing to lift a finger. Then, her husband gambled everything away, went bankrupt, and drowned in debt. But even then, her parents pulled her out of that swamp, helping her retreat from the disaster completely unharmed. The only real misfortune she had ever faced was her father dying in an accident, leaving her and her mother alone. Two women with no ability to survive on their own. They were tricked by relatives, lost their fortune, and Diana fell into the first and only difficult period of her life. She tried to work, but no job ever lasted more than 3 months. She struggled to support her daughter and her mother for just over a year until James appeared. Her shining knight, her savior. Diana is the kind of flower that can only live in a greenhouse. She can't withstand the slightest hardship. Even a gust of cold wind would be enough to knock her down. James was her one and only lifeline, and she would cling to him tightly, refusing to ever let go. But I was certain of one thing: if their life together ever faced real difficulty, Diana would not be the one to stick around and weather the storm with him. She would either collapse completely or find another man willing to catch her, just like James once did. I heard the full story from Megan, who had heard it from a client whose wife was at the spa that day. It was about how Diana had single-handedly ruined that major contract for James. He had taken her to an exclusive spa resort to meet an important female executive, thinking Diana could charm her, wife to wife, in the hot spring pool. Just as both women had changed into their swimsuits, Diana made a single, loud comment, her voice sharp and clear in the steamy air. "Wow, you really need to lose some weight, don't you?" The executive's face had apparently darkened instantly, her lips pressing into a tight line, her eyes turning icy. The other wives who were there froze, their hands flying to their mouths, exchanging horrified glances. Diana, meanwhile, seemed oblivious. She cheerfully snapped selfies, made a video call to her daughter, and laughed brightly, as if she hadn't just committed a massive social and professional blunder. By the time she finally ended her call, the executive had already left. Diana soaked for another half hour. Carefree as a child, James waited outside, Stunned. When his wife returned alone, "Where did she go?" he had asked, a note of panic in his voice. Diana had just shrugged, her tone airy. "How would I know?" James called the executive, but no one answered. The spa manager informed him that she had checked out. The next day, she officially canceled the deal and signed with one of James's biggest competitors. I had to admit, I smiled when I heard the story, not out of satisfaction, but out of a sense of grim understanding. Diana doesn't know how to communicate. She doesn't know how to give a graceful compliment or carry a basic conversation with strangers. If she did, she wouldn't have been fired from half a dozen jobs in a single year. James, who was used to working with sharp, intuitive people like his former assistant, Mike, who could read his boss's mind with just a glance, mistakenly thought that socializing was as easy as breathing. He was wrong for not recognizing who Diana truly was, for not preparing her before taking her to meet a key client. He simply didn't understand the woman he had married. But I, who had only met her a few times, saw her with perfect clarity. There was another incident. During a family gathering with close friends, Diana's daughter, Lily, got into a fight with another child over a toy. Diana rushed in, her face red with fury, and was about to slap the other kid when James grabbed her wrist and pulled her back, his voice a harsh whisper. From then on, I heard he never dared to take her to meet anyone important again. Not clients, and not even his closest friends. My friends used to think I still cared about James, so every time they heard some bad news about him, they would rush to tell me, thinking I'd be pleased. I would just smile and shake my head. I've let go a long time ago. I'd tell them gently, "James is a stranger to me now. I don't want to hear anything about him, good or bad." They were surprised at first, then they nodded, and after that, they never brought him up again. I began to truly enjoy being single. After they retired, my parents, worried that I'd be lonely, insisted on moving in with me. They took over caring for Daisy, tutoring her with the patience and expertise of retired high school teachers, giving me rare and precious moments to myself. After work, I would go shopping, have dinner with friends, or hit the gym, feeling the lightness in my body as sweat soaked through my shirt, washing away the day's stress. Once, after finishing a major project, Megan and I decided to reward ourselves. We booked plane tickets and flew to Iceland to see the northern lights. Standing under the brilliant, dancing green sky, the cold wind whipping through my hair, I laughed out loud. A pure, unrestrained sound of joy. The feeling of freedom that surged through me was intoxicating. Divorce had changed me. My life used to revolve around one word: busy. From morning till night, all year round, I raced against my schedule. Even Thanksgiving, a day meant for rest and gratitude, left me feeling utterly exhausted. Now, I had time to breathe, time to live. I signed up for painting classes 3 times a week, feeling a quiet satisfaction as I held a brush and painted soft, sweeping lines on a canvas, something I never even dared to dream of before. I started planning to learn French, a language I'd always loved, to improve my communication skills for our European clients. And I decided that every summer and winter, I would take my parents and Daisy on a trip, just the 4 of us. Just thinking about those beautiful future plans filled me with a calm, steady energy. I had found my joy in life again. After another year of steady growth, my design studio expanded. Megan and I spent months immersed in the chaos of progress, decorating the new, larger office with clean white walls and lush indoor plants, hiring new staff, training them, and reorganizing the entire company structure. Finally, when everything had settled down into a new, efficient rhythm, I took a deep breath and decided to take a few days off for myself. I grabbed my bag and stepped out of the office. As I passed the security booth in the lobby of my apartment building, the guard, a kind, older man named Sal, called out to me. His voice was low, and his eyes were filled with concern. "Ms. Miller, I need to tell you something," he said, lowering his voice even more. glancing around as if he were afraid someone might overhear. Maybe I'm just being paranoid, but I thought I should warn you, just in case. He leaned closer. A while back, there was a man who tried to follow you into the building, but I stopped him. I asked who he was looking for and offered to call up for him, but he wouldn't say. He just left. He paused, scratching his chin, his expression troubled. Well, recently, that same man bought the apartment right above yours, on the penthouse floor. I don't know what his intentions are, but you should be careful. I nodded and thanked him, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I stepped into the elevator, my hand clutching the strap of my bag, my head spinning. Who could it be? Back in my apartment, I sat on the sofa, the soft yellow light from the lamp illuminating a framed photo of Daisy on the wall. I thought for a while, then stood up, my mind made up. I was going to go upstairs and confront whoever it was. But when I reached the elevator, I hesitated. If this person really had bad intentions, confronting them alone was a foolish risk. I turned around, planning to call Sal and ask for more details, maybe even call the police. Just as I turned, the elevator door slid open with a soft chime. James stood there. Our eyes met. There was a moment of shocked silence. Then, a cold anger washed over me. Say it. What exactly are you trying to do? I asked, my voice like ice, my arms crossed tightly over my chest. We sat facing each other in a quiet nearby restaurant, the bright chandelier light overhead highlighting every new detail on James's face. I was startled. He looked so much older, though it had only been a little over a year since I'd last seen him up close. His cheeks were hollow. The lines at the corners of his eyes and across his forehead were deeper, and his hair was no longer just sprinkled with gray, it was dusted with it, like a heavy frost. Why haven't you dyed your hair? The question slipped out before I could stop it, my voice unintentionally softening. James gave a faint, tired smile, running a hand through his hair. His eyes were lowered to the table. It just grows back too fast. I'd have to keep dyeing it every few days. I'm lazy. He looked up, and his eyes were filled with a profound regret that stunned me. Susan, I can't sleep. His voice trembled. I have a photo of you and Daisy by my bed. I hug it to fall asleep, but after a few days, even that stops working. Then the insomnia comes back. I frowned, my hand tightening around the cold water glass in front of me. You're being ridiculous, I said, my voice hardening again. But James went on, his words tumbling out in a desperate rush. I started following you, not in a creepy way, just driving by your office, your building, and I found that on the days I saw you, even just for a second, I could sleep at night. I was stunned, speechless. I just stared at him, at the raw exhaustion in his eyes. He looked like a man who was completely and utterly lost. You should move out, I said firmly. We've been divorced for 2 years. I don't want anything to do with you. Your wife will cause problems for me. You know I hate trouble. James looked down, then whispered, his voice barely audible. I asked her for a divorce. I was surprised. The glass in my hand quivered, and a few drops of cold water spilled onto the white tablecloth. You what? I asked, leaning forward slightly. Isn't she your one true love? The one you couldn't live without? The sarcasm was sharp in my voice, but beneath it, I felt a flicker of something else, a grim, vindicating satisfaction. James gave a bitter laugh, rubbing his forehead with the heel of his hand. The veins on his temple stood out. I had too many expectations, he said, his voice low and raspy. It turns out first love is only beautiful in your memory. Living with it every day, it's a mess. He began to unload everything, his words a torrent of frustration and regret. Diana isn't just incapable of being independent. She can't even take care of herself. She can't manage the smallest, simplest things. Once, I forgot some important documents at home and asked her to bring them to my office. I told her very clearly that she had to be there on time because the meeting was critical. She arrived an hour late. Why? I asked, unable to help myself. Because, he said, his voice rising with disbelief. She had to carefully do her makeup and pick out the perfect outfit. When I questioned her, she said she wanted to look pretty when she visited my company. He shook his head, his face red with a frustration so deep it seemed to physically pain him. And the documents. Susan, the documents were covered in grease stains, probably from whatever she was eating for lunch. I was too angry to even speak. He took a shaky breath. Her mind just doesn't function normally, no matter how important something is. Even if I repeat it 100 times, she doesn't listen. It's like she lives in her own little world, and nothing from the outside can get in. He paused, his fingers tightening around his glass until his knuckles were bone white. He looked down at the table, his voice dropping to a near whisper. I slapped her. The confession hung in the air between us. It was the first time I've ever hit a woman. I know it's wrong, Susan. I know. But she drives me insane. The moment I come home and see her face, I lose control of myself. I looked at James, at the raw despair in his eyes, but I felt nothing. No pity, no sympathy, just a cold, detached emptiness. This was the man who had thrown our family away for a fantasy, and now the fantasy was crumbling into a nightmare of his own making. There's more, he said, his voice fading, as if he was ashamed to continue. My company landed a major contract, a huge one. I invested almost everything I had, and I even took out a significant bank loan to fund it. When Diana found out, she went hysterical. She started screaming that we would go bankrupt, that I was going to lose everything again. Just like her first husband, she demanded that I pull out of the project. He let out another hollow laugh. She even started hiding the money I'd given her for household expenses, afraid that I'd asked to borrow it from her. I felt completely hopeless. That's when I asked for the divorce. He looked at me then, his eyes pleading. And this is before we've even lost anything. Can you imagine? If I actually did go bankrupt, she'd be gone in a second, wouldn't she? I raised an eyebrow, taking a slow sip of my water. Has she agreed to the divorce? James sighed, the sound heavy with exhaustion. She's hesitating. She's afraid the project might fail and drag her down with me. But she's also scared that if she leaves now and I succeed, she won't get anything from it. Isn't that funny? He looked at me as if he was waiting for comfort, for me to say something reassuring. But I remained silent. I remember those early days, he added softly, his gaze turning inward, when we were starting the company, and you were still there. Hearing him say that made me think back, too. After graduation, I had landed a great job offer at a prestigious firm, but at the last minute, someone with connections stole the position from me. Furious and disillusioned, I quit my job search and joined James's tiny startup instead. We worked through long nights of overtime and navigated one crisis after another. We stayed by each other's side through it all, and somewhere in the middle of the stress and the shared ambition, we fell in love. The company nearly went bankrupt multiple times, but I was always there behind him, my voice a steady presence in the chaos. Just go for it, I'd tell him. If it fails, we'll start over. We're still young. I believed in his talent, in his relentless effort. In the end, we pulled through and built a wide, open path to success. After we got married and Daisy was born, I stepped away from his company. It was my choice. I wanted to start my own design studio, to pursue my own passion. I had stayed at his company in the beginning because of love, not because I enjoyed the cutthroat world of corporate business. James was still talking, his voice a low drone of complaints about Diana, how she'd call him in the middle of important meetings to complain about a leaking pipe in the bathroom, as if he could fix it himself from across town. I cut him off coldly. You're not divorced yet. James, I expect you to keep your distance. Move out of the apartment and leave us alone. I don't want Daisy's life to be affected by this drama. He nodded, his eyes full of a sadness that seemed theatrical and self-serving. Okay, he whispered. I'll move out right away. But after the divorce is final, can I come back? Can we? I stood up, adjusting my coat. "We'll see when that happens," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. I left the restaurant without looking back, leaving him alone with the bill and the ruins of his choices. James needed time to finalize the divorce, and I knew it wouldn't be simple. Diana would fight for every penny. By then, I thought, Daisy would probably have graduated from middle school. I would sell my apartment, and we would move closer to her new high school. By the time he was free, we would be long gone. But in the end, James didn't get a divorce, not because Diana refused, but because, as I would later learn, he didn't really want one. I stood in my kitchen a few months later, the early morning light filtering through the blinds, shining on the cooling cup of coffee on the counter. My phone rang. It was Megan. "Susan," she said, her voice low, hesitant, like she was sharing a terrible secret. "I just heard something from one of our clients. It's about James." The news she delivered swept through me like a cold wind, making me freeze where I stood. Life always has a way of delivering the most unexpected, cruelest blows. James had been diagnosed with late-stage stomach cancer. The doctors had given him 3 years to live. He had told Diana about his illness. He told her he was dying, and that if she just took good care of him until the end, all of his assets would be hers. Diana, I imagined, must have believed him. Or maybe she was simply dazzled by the blinding glow of money. But James, in his final years, became a different man, a cruel man. He blamed Diana for everything. He told her the cancer was her fault, result of the irregular meals she cooked, the constant arguments that caused him so much stress. He found endless, inventive ways to make her suffer. Diana, clinging to her dream of a massive inheritance, gritted her teeth and endured it all. She became his full-time nurse, his servant, his punching bag. The doctors had given James 3 years, but he lasted for 5, as if his sheer willpower, fueled by a deep-seated desire for revenge, was a flame that refused to die out. For 5 long years, Diana lived trapped in his glass cage. She was no longer a princess, but a prisoner, worn down day after day by his unreasonable demands and his psychological torment. When James finally passed away, she must have thought her ordeal was over, that her reward was finally at hand. But then came the final, devastating blow. James had made a will long ago, shortly after our divorce. All of his assets, the company, the real estate, the cash were left to his parents and to Daisy, my daughter. Diana received only a small, run-down apartment on the outskirts of the city. It was just enough to get by, but nowhere near the extravagant, carefree life she had dreamed of and suffered for. Diana was outraged. I heard about the aftermath from James's lawyer, a stoic man who called me to handle the details of Daisy's inheritance. He described the scene with a tired sigh. Diana, her hair disheveled, her eyes swollen and wild with a mixture of grief and fury, had stormed into his office. She was shouting, screaming that it couldn't be real, that there had to be a mistake. "This can't be," she had shrieked, her voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. "I took care of him for 5 years, 5 years of my life." The lawyer, a man who had seen every shade of human greed, simply told her that the will was legal, ironclad, and that she truly had no claim to anything more. That was James's final, calculated act of revenge. He hadn't just wanted to punish her. He wanted to utterly destroy her fantasy, the very foundation of her existence. He had dangled a golden future in front of her, only to snatch it away at the last possible moment, leaving her with nothing but wasted years and the bitter taste of ashes. After that, Diana spiraled. She became unhinged. She started following me, appearing outside my office, waiting by my car in the parking garage. She would demand that I pay her, that I give her a share of what was rightfully hers. "You owe me," she screamed at me one afternoon, her face pale and drawn, her clothes looking worn and unkempt. "He left everything to your daughter. You have to give me something." I looked at her, and for the first time, I felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, just a profound sense of detachment. I was looking at a lost woman, a woman who had spent her entire life clinging to things that were never truly hers: her father's protection, her first husband's wealth, and finally, James's empty promises. I didn't want the drama. I had spent years freeing myself from it. When Daisy received her college acceptance letter a few weeks later, to a prestigious university on the West Coast, path forward became clear. We were leaving. We were going to start over. Somewhere new. Somewhere the ghosts of the past couldn't reach us. We moved to a new city. A place where the streets were lined with jacaranda trees and the air carried the fresh, salty scent of the ocean. I bought a house with a large, sun-drenched garden, a place filled with light and warmth. I stood in our new home, sunlight pouring through the large windows, illuminating a painting Daisy had made that now hung above the fireplace, a vibrant field of wildflowers under a brilliant blue sky. My parents, now with hair the color of silver, sat in the yard, their laughter mingling with Daisy's as they reminisced about the old days. I brewed a pot of tea, the familiar, comforting aroma filling the kitchen. I sat down on the sofa, the soft fabric cool against my skin, and took a deep, cleansing breath. Was Diana pitiful? Maybe, but I didn't give her a single cent. I learned a valuable lesson from watching her, from watching James, with people who only know how to cling. Opening the door even a crack is inviting a flood of trouble that never ends. I've learned that adults who don't know how to stand on their own defeat are not people you try to save. You stay away from them. You save yourself. My life now is filled with quiet mornings, the sound of birds singing in the garden, the soft humming of Daisy as she works on her art in her room. Every day when I step out into the world, I feel a sense of lightness. I'm no longer the busy wife, no longer the mother burdened with managing every detail of everyone else's life. I am Susan Miller. I am free, living for myself and for the people I truly love. Letting go of what was never truly mine was the hardest and best thing I ever did. It wasn't about winning or losing a battle against Diana for James. It was about choosing to walk off the battlefield altogether. James had built a prison for Diana, but in doing so, he had been a prisoner, too, shackled by his own bitterness and resentment. He died in that prison, but I had walked away. I had chosen freedom. My design studio is thriving. I manage it remotely now, with Megan handling the day-to-day operations back in Chicago. We have a great team, and technology makes it easy to stay connected. I fly back a few times a year for important meetings, but my home is here now, on this sunny coast where life moves at a slower pace. Daisy is flourishing in college. She's studying art history, and her passion for it lights up her face whenever she talks about it. The wounds from her father's betrayal have faded, replaced by a quiet strength and a wisdom beyond her years. She has a good heart, but she also has boundaries. She learned that lesson the hard way, but she learned it well. One afternoon, Daisy came home for the weekend, her arms full of canvases. She set them up in the garden and started to paint. I sat on the porch, watching her, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the trees. The sun was warm on my skin. She looked over at me and smiled. "You look happy, Mom." I smiled back. "I am happy, sweetheart." And it was the truth. It wasn't the perfect, curated happiness I used to project to the world. It was something deeper, quieter, and more resilient. It was a happiness I had built for myself, piece by piece, out of the wreckage of a life I thought I wanted. I thought about the pineapple cake, that symbol of my old life, of my endless efforts to please a man who was never truly satisfied. I hadn't baked one in years. I no longer had to endure a scent I hated just to see someone else smile. The realization was so simple, yet so profound. The most important person I needed to please was myself. My phone buzzed. It was a text from a friend back in Chicago. She had seen Diana recently. She was working as a cashier at a grocery store, looking tired and much older than her years. For a moment, a shadow of the past flickered in my mind. But then I looked at the garden, at my daughter painting under the golden afternoon sun, at my parents laughing on the patio, and the shadow vanished. That was another life, Another story. And it was no longer mine to read. I took a sip of my tea. The future stretched out before me. A blank canvas, full of light and possibility. And I couldn't wait to paint it. The text message from my old friend in Chicago glowed on the screen. A small intrusion from a world I no longer belonged to. Diana, working as a cashier. The image was vivid and sad. For a moment, a shadow of the past flickered in my mind. A ghost of the woman I used to be, who might have felt a sharp, satisfying sting of victory. But the feeling didn't last. It dissolved as quickly as it came, replaced by the gentle sound of the waves crashing on the shore a few blocks from my house. I put the phone down. That was another life, another story, and it was no longer mine to read. My days now had a rhythm dictated by sunlight and inspiration, not by schedules and obligations. I woke up early, not to an alarm, but to the chorus of birds outside my window. I'd take a walk on the beach with my parents, the cool morning sand beneath my feet, watching the sky shift from pale lavender to a brilliant, hopeful orange. The sheer vastness of the ocean had a way of putting everything into perspective. The dramas and heartbreaks of my old life seemed so small, so insignificant, against the endless horizon. One morning, an email popped into my inbox. It was from one of the spa wives, a woman named Brenda whose life revolved around gossip and maintaining social status. The subject line was "just thinking of you," but I knew what it really was. "Susan, darling," the email began, "I heard you moved to California. It sounds absolutely divine. We were all just talking about you the other day. You were so right to leave him. You truly won. In the end, I saw his widow the other day. So tragic what happened to her. She looks like she's aged 20 years. Anyway, you must tell me all about your fabulous new life." I read the words, and a cold wave of recognition washed over me. This was the world I had escaped. A world where marriage was a competition, divorce was a victory or a defeat, and other women's pain was a currency for conversation. In their eyes, I had won. But I knew the truth. The only way to win that game was to refuse to play. I typed a brief, polite reply. "Brenda, it's lovely to hear from you. Life here is very quiet and peaceful. Wishing you all the best. Susan." I hit send and deleted the email chain. I felt no triumph, no superiority. I only felt a quiet gratitude for the distance I had put between that life and this one. Later that week, while unpacking a box of old photo albums I'd finally decided to sort through, I found a picture of James and me on our wedding day. We were so young, his arm wrapped tightly round my waist, both of us smiling with a kind of fierce, naive optimism. I traced the outline of his face with my finger. I didn't feel anger anymore. The burning rage had long since cooled into something else, a kind of detached pity. He wasn't a monster. He was just a weak man. A man who had built his life on a fantasy and then crumbled when that fantasy couldn't withstand the weight of reality. He had romanticized Diana as the perfect, ethereal creature he had lost, and he had cast me in the role of the capable, practical manager of his life. He needed both, but he couldn't have them in one person, and he was too cowardly to accept the complexities of a real, breathing partnership. He had chased a ghost and, in the end, had become one himself, haunted by regret and bitterness. I closed the album and put it back in the box. I didn't need to throw it away. It was part of my story, part of the journey that had brought me here, but it was a closed chapter. That evening, Daisy and I were sitting on the back porch, watching the fireflies begin to dot the twilight air. She had been home from college for the summer, filling the house with her art, her music, and her easy laughter. "Mom," she said, her voice thoughtful as she looked out at the darkening garden, "have you ever thought about dating again?" The question surprised me, but I considered it honestly. "I don't know, sweetheart," I said. "I'm not against it, but I'm not looking for it either." For so many years, my identity was tied to being James's wife. Then it was the divorced woman. Right now, I'm just Susan, and I really like her. I want to get to know her better before I introduce her to anyone else." Daisy smiled, a knowing, mature look in her eyes. "I get that," she said softly. "I'm glad you're happy, Mom." Truly, that conversation stayed with me. It was true. I was getting to know myself again, or maybe for the first time. The real me, not the perfect wife or the perfect mother or the perfect hostess. Just Susan, a woman who loved the smell of turpentine and oil paints, who could spend hours in a bookstore, who found peace in the quiet solitude of a garden. A few days later, I was in the local grocery store. As I rounded the corner into the produce section, I saw them, a large, formidable pile of pineapples. The sight of them, with their spiky crowns and rough, patterned skin, stopped me in my tracks. The memory of the smell, the cloying sweetness I had always hated, came rushing back. The pineapple cake. For years, that cake had been a symbol of my marriage. It was an act of service. Yes, but it was more than that. It was an act of self-denial. It was me, pushing my own dislikes aside, putting on a mask literally and figuratively to perform the role of the devoted wife, who catered to her husband's every preference. I had told myself it was love, but it wasn't. It was labor. It was the unpaid, unacknowledged work of maintaining an image. James ate that cake every year, but did he ever truly see the effort behind it? Did he ever realize that the person baking it was sacrificing a small piece of her own comfort for his momentary pleasure? I don't think he did. He just saw the cake, a symbol of the perfect life he was entitled to. Standing there in the grocery store, I realized the most liberating part of my new life wasn't the big things, like the new house or the financial independence. It was the small things. It was the absence of pineapple. It was the freedom to build a life around my own joys, my own preferences, my own peace. I walked past the pineapples without a second glance and continued my shopping. My new house had a small, sunlit room at the back that I had converted into my own art studio. It was my sanctuary, filled with canvases, the scent of fresh paint, and the beautiful, organized chaos of creation. That evening, after everyone had gone to bed, I walked into the studio. The moon cast a silvery glow through the large window, illuminating a large, blank canvas that sat on an easel in the center of the room. For years, I had helped build James's company. I had helped build our family. I had helped build our social standing. I had been the architect, the manager, the silent partner in everyone else's life project. Now, finally, I had my own. I picked up a charcoal pencil. The smooth, cool wood felt solid and real in my hand. I looked at the vast, white emptiness of the canvas, and I didn't feel fear or uncertainty. I felt a thrill of pure, exhilarating possibility. My life was no longer a story written by someone else, a role I had to perform. It was a blank canvas, and I was the artist. With a small, confident smile, I reached out and made the first mark.